The boot should have been buried with the man who wore it. Before sunrise, when the Oregon woods still held the night in their branches, Staff Sergeant Caleb Walker woke to a sound he had not heard since overseas. 3 slow scratches at his front door, then silence. Then one more scratch, careful and weak, like a warning from something that knew not to make noise. He opened his eyes in the dark cabin and listened. The wood stove had gone cold. Rain whispered across the roof. Somewhere beyond the window, the pines leaned and creaked in the wind, their black shapes pressed against the glass like old witnesses. Caleb did not move at first. 37 years old, former United States Marine, white-skinned, broad-shouldered, and tired in the way only quiet men become tired. He had learned long ago that fear rarely announces itself loudly. It waits. It breathes. It scratches once at the door. He reached for the flashlight beside his bed, slipped into his boots, and crossed the cabin floor with slow steps, the old boards complaining under his weight. Another scratch came, then a soft whine. Caleb's hand froze on the latch. "Luna," he murmured. The name came out rough, still half-tangled in sleep. He opened the door, and the cold came in first, sharp with wet cedar, mud, and the metallic smell of rain on stone. Then he saw her. Luna stood on the porch, soaked to the skin, her sable German shepherd coat darkened almost black along her back, water dripping from her ears and whiskers. Her amber eyes were fixed on him, wide but steady, not panicked, not lost. In her mouth was a soldier's boot. Caleb stared at it for one long second before the world around him seemed to narrow. The boot was not old enough to be forgotten trash. It was standard issue, coyote brown, the leather torn at the side, the laces knotted and stained with black mud. Rainwater dripped from the sole onto the porch boards. Luna did not drop it right away. She held it gently, almost carefully, the way a trained dog carries something important. Caleb crouched, his knees stiff in the cold, and extended one hand. "Easy, girl," he whispered. "Let me see." Luna's ears lowered. She gave the smallest sound, almost a plea, then placed the boot at his feet. Caleb picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been, packed with damp earth and forest debris. He turned it over beneath the flashlight beam, and the beam shook before he realized his hand was trembling. Inside the tongue, nearly erased by water and wear, were 4 faded letters written in black marker. "Read." For a moment, the rain stopped being rain. The forest stopped moving. Even Luna seemed to hold her breath. Corporal Nathan Reed had been dead for 8 months. Caleb had stood at the memorial himself, dress blues pressed, jaw locked, hands folded so tightly his knuckles ached. He had watched an empty flag move in a soft spring wind while officers spoke careful words about loss, service, and sacrifice. They said Nathan died during a training accident near the old range. They said there was nothing anyone could have done. They said a lot of things men say when the truth has already been packed away. Caleb lowered the boot slowly. Luna stepped backward toward the edge of the porch, then looked over her shoulder at the wall of trees behind the cabin. The woods were still dark, thick with rain and fog, swallowing the narrow trail that disappeared between the pines. Caleb followed her gaze. "Where did you get this?" he asked, though he knew she could not answer. Luna turned back to him, eyes bright beneath the porch light. She did not bark. She did not run. She only waited, chest rising and falling, paws muddy, fur dripping onto the boards. Then she took 3 steps toward the trees and stopped. Caleb felt something old wake inside him, something trained, something unwilling. This was not a dog bringing home a toy. This was a message, and whatever was buried in those woods had just found its way back to his door. Caleb brought the boot inside, but the cabin no longer felt like shelter. It felt too small for what had crossed the porch. He set the boot on the kitchen table beneath the yellow light and watched rainwater spread across the wood in a dark, uneven circle. Luna stood near the door, her body angled toward the forest, every muscle held in a quiet line of purpose. She had always been a strange kind of gentle, watchful without being restless, loyal without needing praise. Caleb had found her 6 months earlier near a closed search and rescue kennel outside Eugene, thin from neglect, silent as a shadow, with eyes that looked older than any dog should have. The shelter worker had said she used to track missing people. No one knew why she had been surrendered. No one knew why she refused most handlers. But when Caleb had knelt in front of her kennel and said nothing, Luna had walked over, pressed her nose through the wire, and rested it against his wrist. Since then, she had lived beside him like a promise neither of them had spoken aloud. Now she would not come away from the door. Caleb filled her steel bowl with food, the usual chicken and rice she loved after a wet morning. The smell rose warm into the cold room. Luna did not move. He poured fresh water. She did not blink. "You need to eat," Caleb said softly. His voice sounded too loud against the rain. Luna only turned her head toward the trees. Caleb looked back at the boot. The letters inside had not changed. "Read." He told himself there were explanations. Oregon was full of surplus stores, hunters, hikers, old military gear traded from hand to hand until the stories were rubbed away. Maybe some kid had worn it into the woods. Maybe the name was not Nathan's. Maybe grief had made Caleb see ghosts in black marker. But the size was right. The brand was right. And beneath the mud, near the heel, was a small cut in the leather shaped like a half moon. Caleb remembered that cut. Nathan had laughed about it once after slipping on wet gravel during a field drill, joking that even his boots were trying to resign before he did. Caleb sat down slowly at the table. The chair creaked under him. Outside, dawn began to lift behind the pines, not bright, only gray, as if the whole valley had been covered in ash. The cabin smelled of damp leather, old coffee, and wood smoke gone cold. Luna stepped forward, touched the boot with her nose, then walked back to the door. 3 steps. "Stop. Look back." Caleb's chest tightened. He had seen that rhythm before. Not in a pet. In a working dog giving an alert. Controlled. Repeated. Patient. He rose and opened the door just enough for the morning air to slip in. Luna stepped onto the porch, then down into the wet grass. She did not bolt. She did not wander. She walked to the tree line, stopped beneath the first dark pine, and looked back again. Caleb stayed in the doorway, one hand on the frame, rain misting his face. "No," he whispered, though he was not sure whether he meant it for her, for the woods, or for the dead man whose name lay drying on his table. Luna waited. A raven called somewhere deep in the timber, one rough note swallowed by fog. Caleb felt the old ache behind his ribs, the place where unfinished things lived. 8 months ago, he had accepted a folded flag, a closed report, and a silence that felt too clean. He had wanted to believe the men in uniform who told him Nathan was gone. He had wanted peace more than answers. Luna lowered her head, sniffed the wet ground, then gave one quiet whine. Not fear, not hunger, a request. Caleb looked at the untouched bowl behind him, then at the trail ahead, narrow and nearly hidden under fern and rain. The dog had brought the first piece home. Now she was asking him to follow the rest. Caleb did not follow her into the woods that morning. Not yet. Some instincts are strong enough to move a man, but some memories are heavier than instinct. He closed the door with Luna still outside, then stood with his palm against the wood, listening to her soft breathing on the other side. She did not scratch again. She only waited. That patience made it worse. Caleb turned back to the kitchen table, picked up his cell phone, and stared at the old contact list he had not opened in months. The names were ghosts in alphabetical order. Officers, medics, men who had once shared coffee in cold places and silence in worse ones. His thumb stopped on Captain Aaron Miles, the last man from the unit who still answered without making Caleb feel like a problem. The call rang 5 times before a voice came through, low and rough with sleep. "Walker." Caleb looked at the boot. "I need to ask you something about Nathan Reed." The line changed. Not disconnected. Not silent exactly. It tightened. Caleb heard a heater running somewhere on the other end, a faint clink of a coffee mug, and then nothing. "Why are you asking about Reed?" Miles said. Caleb kept his voice steady. "Luna brought something home before dawn. A boot. Military issue. His name is written inside." Another pause. Longer this time. Rain tapped against the kitchen window like small fingers. "Where did she find it?" Miles asked. "That is what I am trying to figure out." "Then do not." Caleb straightened. "Say that again." Miles exhaled slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, almost careful. "Listen to me, Caleb. Reed is gone. The report is closed. Whatever that dog dragged in, it is not worth opening doors that were shut for a reason." Caleb felt something cold move through him. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. He had heard men sound like that before. Not guilty, not innocent. Afraid of the space between. "You were at the memorial," Caleb said. "You looked his mother in the eye." "I know where I was." Then tell me why you sound like a man standing too close to a lie. The line hissed. Somewhere outside, Luna gave one low whine. Miles spoke again. Each word clipped like he wanted to get rid of it before it hurt him. Burn it. Forget where she found it. And keep your dog out of those woods. The call ended before Caleb could answer. He held the phone to his ear for a moment after the screen went dark. The cabin seemed colder now. The boots sat on the table under the yellow lamp, ugly and ordinary and impossible. Caleb reached for an old towel and wiped mud from the side of the heel until the half-moon cut in the leather showed clearly. No mistake. Nathan had worn this boot. Nathan, who used to hum old country songs under his breath when he was nervous. Nathan, who sent half his paycheck home to his younger sister in Idaho. Nathan, who had once carried a lost puppy 3 miles back to camp because he said leaving small things behind was how men forgot they had souls. Caleb opened the door. Luna stood at the edge of the porch, rain shining along her back. She looked at him once, then toward the trees. Caleb stepped outside, but before he could reach for his jacket, the distant sound of a truck rolled across the wet road beyond the cabin. Not passing by, slowing down. Luna's ears rose. Her body lowered, alert and silent. Through the gray curtain of rain, Caleb saw headlights crawl between the pines near the gravel turnoff, then stop where no visitor had any reason to stop. For the first time that morning, Luna growled. Low, measured, not at the woods, at whoever had come to make sure the past stayed buried. The headlights stayed at the gravel turnoff for almost a full minute, 2 pale eyes staring through the rain. Caleb did not move from the porch. Luna stood 1 step below him, her shoulders squared, her wet coat rising slightly along the spine. The growl in her chest was not loud enough to carry far, but Caleb felt it in the boards beneath his boots. Whoever sat in that truck was watching. Then the engine shifted, the lights swung away, and the vehicle rolled back down the road without coming closer. No door opened. No voice called out. Only tire tracks remained in the softened mud, dark and fresh beside the ditch. Caleb waited until the sound faded completely before he let out the breath he had been holding. We are not alone in this, he said. Luna looked back once, as if she had known that long before he did. He stepped inside, locked the door, and moved with the calm of a man remembering old habits he wished he had forgotten. Jacket from the peg, flashlight from the drawer, first aid kit from beneath the sink, compass from the windowsill. He did not reach for a weapon. He was not going into those trees to hurt anyone. He was going because a dog had carried home the truth 1 piece at a time, and truth, once it finds the porch, does not leave quietly. Caleb wrapped Nathan's boot in a clean towel and placed it in a canvas pack. Luna watched every movement. When he zipped the pack, she gave a short breath through her nose and stepped toward the door again. Outside, the morning had thinned into a gray afternoon without ever becoming bright. Rain slipped from the roof in silver strings. The forest beyond the cabin waited under fog, each pine trunk black with water, each fern bent under the weight of the storm. Caleb followed Luna down the porch steps and across the yard, boots sinking into the wet grass. She led him to the tree line, then stopped at the same place as before, her nose lowered to the ground. She circled once, found the scent, and entered the woods. The trail was narrow and half swallowed by blackberry vines. Caleb had walked parts of it before, but never this way, never with Luna moving like she was following a map written beneath the soil. She did not chase squirrels. She did not pause at deer tracks. She kept her head low, ears forward, tail steady behind her. After a quarter mile, the cabin disappeared completely behind the trees. The air changed. It grew colder, wetter, filled with the smell of moss, cedar bark, and earth turned recently by heavy tires. Caleb noticed the tracks first near an old logging cut. They crossed the trail in deep ruts, wider than a pickup, fresher than the morning rain should have allowed. Luna stopped beside them, sniffed once, then refused to follow the tire marks. Instead, she turned uphill, toward a ridge Caleb had not climbed in years. What did you find out here, girl? He whispered. Luna moved faster. The forest tightened around them. Branches brushed Caleb's shoulders. Water ran down the back of his neck. Twice he thought he heard something behind him, a snap, a shift, a breath that did not belong to the rain. But when he turned, there was only fog between the trunks. Luna did not look back. She pressed on until the ground leveled near a fallen cedar split by lightning. There she stopped. Her body went still. Slowly, carefully, she stepped beneath the broken limbs and nosed at a hollow in the roots. Caleb knelt beside her and pushed away wet leaves. At first, he saw only mud. Then his fingers touched fabric. He pulled gently. A strip of camouflage cloth came free, wrapped around a small rusted key. Caleb wiped it against his sleeve. Stamped into the metal were 4 numbers, faint but readable. 1947. His mouth went dry. That was not a house key, not a truck key. It belonged to the old emergency bunker near the abandoned training range, a place sealed after Nathan's accident and marked unsafe by men who suddenly had many reasons to keep people away. Luna touched the strip of fabric with her nose and gave a sound so soft it nearly vanished into the rain. Caleb unfolded the cloth. A torn unit patch clung to one edge, the threads frayed, the colors dimmed by mud but still visible. Nathan's unit. Caleb looked deeper into the hollow beneath the cedar roots. Something had been hidden here. Something Luna had found. Something someone else had not wanted found. Then, far behind them, from the direction of the trail, came the low rumble of an engine stopping. Luna lifted her head. Caleb closed his hand around the key. The woods, which had seemed empty a second before, suddenly felt full of eyes. The engine did not come closer, but it did not leave either. Its low idle moved through the trees like a buried warning, softened by rain, broken by distance, impossible to place. Caleb stayed crouched beside the fallen cedar, the rusted key pressed into his palm until its teeth marked his skin. Luna stood in front of him, body angled downhill, ears high, eyes fixed on the trail they had taken. She did not bark. That frightened him more than noise would have. A barking dog announces danger. A silent working dog measures it. Caleb slipped the strip of camouflage cloth into his pack, then touched 2 fingers lightly to Luna's shoulder. "Easy," he whispered. Her tail did not move. Somewhere beyond the fog, a car door shut. Then another. Not loud. Careful. The kind of sound made by people who did not want the woods to know they had arrived. Caleb looked upslope toward the old ridge. He remembered the emergency bunker only in pieces, a concrete shelter built during another generation's fear, later used for field exercises, radio drills, and bad coffee during winter training. It sat somewhere beyond the ridge, half hidden beneath ferns and old warning signs, sealed after Nathan's reported accident. At least that was what the report had said. Sealed. Unsafe. No further access required. Words that had felt official then. Words that now felt like boards nailed over a window. Luna suddenly turned away from the sound behind them and moved uphill. Caleb followed without speaking. The climb grew steeper after the cedar, the ground slick under his boots, the trail no longer a trail but a suggestion between soared ferns and wet stone. Rain tapped on leaves above them. Water slid down Caleb's collar and soaked into his shirt. His breath came harder, white in the cold air, but Luna kept a steady pace, stopping only when he fell too far behind. Twice, he saw marks in the mud that did not belong to deer or hikers. Boot prints. Fresh. Larger than his. Pointed in the same direction. The forest was not abandoned. It was being visited. Caleb's mind returned to Captain Miles's voice. Burn it. Forget where she found it. Keep your dog out of those woods. He had heard warnings before. Some came from care. Some came from fear. And some came from men who hoped obedience would do what lies could not. Luna reached the top of the ridge just as the trees opened into a narrow clearing. Caleb stopped beside her. The place looked wrong before he understood why. In a living forest, everything falls into disorder. Branches, moss, needles, old leaves, each thing settling where weather leaves it. But here, the ground had been arranged. Pine needles had been scattered too evenly. Rocks had been placed along the clearing edge in a line too clean for nature. Near the center stood 2 crossed sticks tied with a strip of faded cord. Hanging from the cord was a metal dog tag, dull with rain. Caleb moved toward it slowly. His hands felt numb. The tag turned once in the wind, and the engraved name caught the gray light. Nathan Reed. Caleb did not touch it at first. He only stared, hearing again the folded voices at the memorial, the careful speeches, the words meant to make absence respectable. Then Luna stepped past him and began sniffing the ground around the marker. She circled once, twice, then pawed gently at the soil. Not frantic. Certain. Caleb knelt and pressed his hand to the earth. The dirt was loose. Too recently turned. His throat tightened. "No," he said under his breath. It came out more like a prayer than a denial. He began clearing the top layer with his hands, moving pine needles and soft mud aside. The soil gave way quickly. After only a few inches, his fingers struck canvas. Not bone, not a coffin. Canvas. Caleb brushed faster now, careful but urgent, until the shape emerged from the ground, an old military duffel bag wrapped in plastic sheeting. Luna backed away and watched the trees. Caleb pulled the bag free with a wet sucking sound and set it on the ground. The zipper resisted, clogged with dirt, then opened halfway. Inside were portable radios, sealed document sleeves, medical wrappers, and 3 encrypted storage drives packed in foam. Evidence, not remains. Someone had built a grave for a man and buried secrets inside it. Caleb looked at the false marker, then at Nathan's name swinging in the rain. The sadness in him shifted into something colder and steadier. Then Luna growled. Caleb turned. Downhill, between the trunks, a flashlight blinked once. Then went dark. The darkness after the flashlight felt thicker than the fog. Caleb stayed low beside the open duffel bag, rain dripping from his jaw, his hand still resting on the plastic sheeting, as if touch alone could prove the evidence was real. Luna stood between him and the trees, her paws planted in the mud, her head lowered just enough to show she had made her choice. No bark, no sudden movement, only that low, steady warning rolling from her chest like distant thunder. Caleb listened. The engine below was silent now. Footsteps came instead, slow and careful, through wet brush. One person, maybe 2, moving with the hesitation of people who knew the ground but did not trust what waited ahead. Caleb eased the zipper of the duffel closed, slid 2 of the small storage drives into his jacket pocket, and left the rest where it lay. He did not know what was on them. He only knew men did not bury radios, documents, and medical supplies beneath a false grave unless they were afraid of daylight. Walker, a voice called from the trees. Calm, familiar, not Captain Miles. Caleb's eyes narrowed. A tall figure stepped into the edge of the clearing, one hand raised against the rain, the other holding the flashlight at his side. Deputy Marshal Graham Holt wore a dark rain jacket over a clean button-down shirt, boots polished poorly enough to look out of place in the mud. Caleb recognized him from Nathan's memorial, from the folded report, from the official handshake that had lasted 1 second too long. Holt had been the man who said the investigation was painful but complete. The man who had looked Nathan's mother in the face and promised her son had not suffered alone. That bag is federal property, Holt said. Caleb rose slowly. Then you already knew it was here. Holt's expression did not change. Rain ran down his temples and gathered at his collar. You should not have come up here. A lot of people keep saying that today. Luna took one quiet step forward. Holt's eyes dropped to her. Something passed across his face then, small but honest. Recognition. That dog, he murmured. Caleb heard it. You have seen her before. Holt looked back at him. Put the bag down and walk away. Where is Nathan? For the first time, the deputy marshal blinked too slowly. Nathan Reed is dead. Caleb reached into his pack and pulled out the muddy boot. He held it up between them. Then the dead have started sending messages. Holt's jaw tightened. Wind moved through the clearing, shaking rain from the pine needles in a sudden cold rush. Luna's growl deepened, but Caleb touched her collar lightly. Easy, girl. Holt's voice lowered. You think this is justice? Digging around in places you do not understand? There are things bigger than one Marine, bigger than one bad report. Caleb looked at the crossed sticks, the dog tag, the fake grave built from cowardice and wet earth. There is nothing bigger than leaving a man behind. The words settled into the clearing. Even the rain seemed to pause around them. Holt lifted the flashlight, not as a threat, but as a warning, pointing its beam toward the duffel. Last chance. Luna suddenly turned her head away from Holt. Her ears sharpened, not toward the trees, not toward the road, but toward the ground beneath the clearing. Caleb followed her gaze. At first, there was nothing. Only mud, roots, and the thin patter of rain. Then he heard it. A faint sound under the earth. 3 metallic taps. Pause. 3 more. Not random. Not water in a pipe. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He knew that rhythm. Every Marine knew some version of it. A distress signal. A human hand trying to reach the living through dirt, wood, and time. Luna whined once. High and broken, and moved toward a cluster of roots near the far side of the clearing. Holt stepped forward. "Do not." Caleb did not look at him. The tapping came again, weaker now. 3. Pause. 3. Beneath the roots, half hidden by moss and old branches, Caleb saw the outline of something square. Not stone, not earth. A hatch. The rusted key in his pocket suddenly felt hot against his chest. Luna pressed her nose to the seam and looked back at him, eyes shining with rain and urgency. Caleb understood then. The boot had not been the beginning. It had been the last thing Luna could carry far enough to make someone listen. He stepped past Holt, knelt beside the hatch, and pulled out the key. The key entered the lock with a sound so small it should not have mattered, yet it cut through the clearing like a bell. Caleb turned it slowly. Rust resisted, grinding beneath his fingers, and for one breath he feared the metal would snap before the pass could open. Luna pressed closer, her wet shoulder against his arm, her eyes fixed on the seam beneath the roots. Behind them, Deputy Marshal Holt moved one step forward. "Walker, stop." Caleb did not turn. "You had 8 months to say that to the men who needed stopping." The lock gave way with a dull click. The hatch shifted upward barely half an inch, releasing a breath of air so stale and cold it seemed to come from a place no sunlight had remembered. Caleb gripped the edge and pulled. Mud clung to the frame. Roots tugged at it like old hands. Luna lowered her head and braced beside him, whining softly, as if she understood the door was not only heavy with earth, but with every lie laid over it. At last, the hatch opened wide enough to reveal a narrow metal ladder descending into darkness. The smell rose first. Damp concrete, old batteries, canned food gone sour, and something human beneath it all, tired, fragile, alive. Caleb shined his flashlight down. The beam struck a concrete wall, a rusted pipe, a blanket folded in the corner, then a hand resting weakly against the floor. His heart stopped for one beat. "Nathan," he breathed. A faint voice came back from below, broken almost beyond sound. "Caleb." Luna barked once, sharp and trembling, the first true bark she had given all day. Caleb swung his legs onto the ladder. Holt's voice hardened behind him. "Do not go down there." Caleb looked up then. Holt stood near the false grave, rain dripping from the brim of his hood, his face pale in the gray light. He did not look like a villain from a story. He looked like a man who had spent too long obeying fear until fear learned to wear his face. Caleb's voice was low. "Call emergency services." Holt said nothing. "Call them," Caleb repeated. Still nothing. Luna stepped between Holt and the hatch, her body silent, steady, immovable. She did not lunge. She did not snarl wildly. She simply stood there with the ancient patience of every loyal creature that has ever guarded a wounded soul. Holt looked at her, and whatever command he had planned to give died before it reached his mouth. Caleb climbed down. The ladder was slick beneath his boots. Each rung groaned under his weight. At the bottom, the bunker opened into a small concrete room no larger than a storage shed, half filled with old shelves, emergency crates, and a cot pushed against the wall. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs. His flashlight moved over empty water bottles, folded wrappers, a cracked radio. Tally marks scratched into the wall, hundreds of them, lined in careful rows by a hand that had refused to surrender to silence. Nathan Reed lay on the cot, thinner than Caleb remembered, beard grown in uneven patches, face pale beneath the dirt and exhaustion. His eyes opened slowly, and when they found Caleb, they filled with a disbelief so gentle it hurt worse than panic. "You came," Nathan whispered. Caleb crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt beside him. Luna came first. At the sound of her name, Nathan's gaze shifted toward the hatch above. A faint smile trembled at the corner of his mouth. "Every night," he said. "She found the vent. Brought scraps. Stayed until morning sometimes. I thought I was dreaming her." Caleb looked toward the far wall and saw the vent then, half hidden behind roots, barely wide enough for a dog's nose, surrounded by palm marks in the mud outside. Luna had not discovered him that morning. She had been keeping him alive in ways no report would ever write down. Caleb reached for the emergency blanket in his pack and wrapped it around Nathan's shoulders with careful hands. "We are getting you out." Nathan closed his eyes, but one tear slipped free and ran into the dirt at his temple. "They told everyone I was gone." Caleb swallowed hard. Not everyone believed them forever. Above them, Luna barked again, not in fear this time, but in warning. Caleb lifted his flashlight toward the open hatch. Holt's silhouette had vanished from the rim. In the distance, through the rain and trees, came the faint sound of another engine approaching. Then another, tires crunching over wet gravel. Caleb did not know whether they belonged to help or to the men who had buried the truth. He only knew Luna was still standing guard. The first engine stopped near the ridge road. The second came closer, then slowed with the caution of people arriving at a place where the ground itself seemed to hold its breath. Caleb stayed beside Nathan in the bunker, one hand braced against the cold concrete wall, the other resting on Nathan's shoulder through the emergency blanket. Above them, Luna's paws shifted once across the wet hatch frame. She did not retreat. Caleb could see her outline in the pale opening, ears forward, rain falling around her like silver threads. "Who was up there?" Nathan whispered. His voice was so weak it felt like a candle fighting a draft. Caleb listened. Doors opened. Radios crackled. A woman's voice called out from the trees, clear and official. "United States Forest Service search team. Identify yourselves." Caleb closed his eyes for half a second, not in relief exactly, but in gratitude too deep for words. Then another voice followed, older, rougher, familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. "Walker, it is Miles. I called them. I am sorry I waited." Caleb looked up through the hatch. Luna remained still until Captain Aaron Miles stepped into view with both hands visible, rain shining on his gray jacket, regret written plainly across his face. Behind him, 2 county deputies and 3 search and rescue volunteers spread through the clearing, their flashlights cutting soft white paths through the fog. Deputy Marshal Holt stood several yards away, silent now, his hands lowered, his face turned toward the false grave as if seeing it for the first time. No one rushed. No one shouted. The forest had already heard enough lies spoken loudly. Caleb called up, "We need a medic. He is alive." Those 4 words changed the clearing. The volunteers moved with quiet urgency, lowering a pack, then a stretcher basket, then warm blankets that smelled faintly of nylon, rain, and antiseptic. Luna stepped aside only when the first medic reached the hatch, but even then she kept her nose close to the opening, watching every hand that moved toward Nathan. Caleb helped guide them in the cramped space, speaking softly to Nathan, telling him each step before it happened. "They're going to lift you. Slow and easy. Stay with me." Nathan nodded once, tears bright in his tired eyes, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of being touched by help after so many nights of listening to nothing but roots, rain, and his own breath. As they raised him toward the hatch, Luna leaned down, stretching her neck as far as she could. Nathan's fingers lifted from the blanket, trembling, and brushed the fur along her muzzle. "I knew you were real," he whispered. Luna closed her eyes for one heartbeat and pressed into his hand. No one in the clearing spoke. Even Captain Miles looked away. When they brought Nathan out, the rain had softened into mist. The false grave stood nearby with the dog tag still turning in the wind, but it no longer owned his name. Caleb climbed out last, covered in mud, carrying the canvas pack and the small drives from his jacket. He handed them to one of the deputies without ceremony. Miles stepped toward him, his face pale beneath the hood. "I should have done more." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. There were many things he could have said. Angry things. True things. Instead, he looked toward Nathan, wrapped in blankets, alive beneath the gray Oregon sky. "Then start now." Miles nodded, and for once, there was no defense in him. Only shame, and maybe the first honest courage of the day. As the search team carried Nathan down toward the waiting ambulance, Luna walked beside the stretcher basket, matching its pace step for step. No command had been given. None was needed. Caleb followed behind them, and every few yards he saw the proof of her long vigil. Paw marks near the vent, small paths pressed through ferns, places where she had squeezed beneath branches night after night to reach a man the world had declared gone. She had not solved the mystery with strength. She had solved it with return, again and again, in rain, in darkness, in silence. At the edge of the clearing, Nathan opened his eyes once more and looked back at Caleb. "She kept coming," he said. Caleb placed a hand on Luna's wet head. "That is what the faithful do." The ambulance lights glowed faintly through the trees, red and white against the fog, not like sirens of panic, but like candles finding their way home. 3 weeks later, the rain had finally moved east, leaving the Oregon hills washed clean beneath a pale morning sun. The hospital in Eugene smelled of fresh linen, floor polish, and coffee from the nurse's station, ordinary things that felt almost holy after the bunker's cold air. Nathan Reed sat upright near the window, thinner than his old photographs, but no longer hidden from the world, a blanket over his knees and sunlight resting gently across his hands. His mother had come from Idaho the night after the rescue and had not let go of him for nearly an hour. She had touched his face as if learning it again, then whispered his name the way people speak when a prayer has walked into the room, wearing skin. Caleb stood near the doorway, quiet in a navy jacket, his white face still marked by sleeplessness, his eyes softer than they had been in years. Luna lay beside Nathan's bed with her head on her paws, sable coat brushed clean, amber eyes half closed but watchful. Every nurse on the floor knew her by then. No one called her a pet. Not after hearing what she had done. The investigation had moved faster than Caleb expected once daylight found the evidence. The buried drives opened sealed doors. The radios, reports, and hidden supplies told a story that frightened some men and freed others. Deputy Marshal Holt surrendered his badge before the county ever asked for it. Captain Miles gave a full statement and then sat alone in the hospital chapel until long after midnight. Caleb did not know how every name would fall or what courtrooms would decide, but he knew this: the lie no longer had a place to sleep. That afternoon, Nathan asked to leave the hospital for 1 hour. The doctor resisted at first, then saw Luna standing beside the wheelchair, steady as a promise, and finally nodded with the tired mercy of someone who understood that healing is not only measured in pulse and pressure. They drove 22 miles to the small military cemetery outside town, where cedar trees bordered the gravel path and flags moved softly in the clean wind. Nathan's memorial stone stood near the back row, simple and white, carved with his name, rank, and a date that no longer belonged to him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Caleb stood behind the wheelchair. Luna sat at Nathan's side. The grass was damp from earlier rain, and the air carried the scent of cut pine and distant river water. Nathan reached forward and touched the stone with trembling fingers. His face folded, not in weakness, but in the strange grief of a man who had returned and still had to mourn the part of himself that had not. "They buried my name," he said softly. Caleb looked at the marker. "But not you." Nathan nodded once. A cemetery worker arrived with a small tool bag and, with Nathan's permission, removed the metal nameplate from the stone. No ceremony, no speech, just 4 screws turning free, one by one, until the false ending came loose in his hands. Luna lowered her head against Nathan's knee. He placed his palm between her ears and held it there. "You kept coming," he whispered. Luna closed her eyes. Caleb looked away toward the cedars, where sunlight slipped through the branches in narrow gold lines. He thought of the first scratch at the door, the wet boot on the porch, the silence in Luna's eyes. He thought of all the ways grace arrives without asking to be believed. Sometimes it does not come as thunder. Sometimes it does not come through medals, reports, or men in clean uniforms speaking careful words. Sometimes it comes through mud on a porch, paw prints in the rain, and a German shepherd who refuses to let the living be mistaken for the lost. Nathan looked up at Caleb then, his voice barely above the wind. "What happens now?" Caleb rested one hand on Luna's back, feeling the steady warmth beneath her fur. "Now we go home," he said, and for the first time in 8 months, the word home did not sound like a place someone had left behind. It sounded like a door still open, a bowl filled by the stove, a quiet dog sleeping near the feet of men who had survived the dark, and a truth that had finally found its way into the light.